There is/was this rumor floating around for a bit about how Capcom is potentially planning to remake the first Resident Evil game once again. For any of you who don't know, RE1 actually already received a remake for the GameCube way back in the ancient times of 2002. In fact, it's probably the version most people are familiar with at this point. The director for the original game, Shinji Mikami, returned to helm said remake, believing that the more powerful hardware of the GameCube meant this new version would be closer to his original vision for Resident Evil. Unlike the more recent remakes in the series, which have taken the fixed camera/tank control pre-rendered backgrounds of their source games and transformed them into third-person over-the-shoulder shooters, the RE1 remake is much closer to the original in regards to style and presentation. In a way, it's more of an expanded remaster than the completely reimagined RE2 remake and the ones that followed. Don't get me wrong, there was plenty of stuff added like new puzzles, new enemies, and new areas, and the general reception of the game is that it's one of, if not the best survival horror game out there. It took the game that popularized the genre and made it even better somehow. It also helps that it's been ported to damn near every console under the sun. Remake is an amazing game, and if you haven't played it before and you're a fan of the series or the genre, then you are dearly missing out. Now, after hearing all that, you might be wondering why Capcom would even feel the need to remake a game for the second time when they pretty much nailed it the first go around. Well, first off, this is all strictly conjecture. At the time of recording, there is no official word that a Resident Evil remake is actually being worked on or even being considered. There are a few rumors floating around and fans have been talking about the possibility for a while now, but Capcom has said nothing. Just want to make sure that is very, very clear. I have no idea if a remake is happening, and for the purpose of this video, it doesn't really matter either. I just want to talk about why I don't necessarily think it would be a bad idea if it does end up happening, and give some reasons why I think it would actually be pretty cool if they did. I'm Tin, by the way. This is Tin Max. Like and subscribe and all that jazz, and let's dive on in. First, I want to say that I have a pretty clear bias to the more current remakes. Resident Evil 2 Remake was my first RE game, and I absolutely adore it. It's not perfect by any means, and the original is obviously amazing too, but if asked which one I'd rather play, my choice will always be the remake. RE3 Remake is a bit undercooked, but not really a bad game. It is worse than the original, and it's definitely not a $60 game, which is how much I spent on it, but you know, that's whatever at this point. RE4 Remake is incredible, and was by far my favorite game released last year. Now, I like the classics for all of these, but as someone who was -1 years old when the first Resident Evil game came out, and only 5 when its remake first released, I definitely lean more towards the modern interpretations. They look great, the controls are significantly better than those god-awful tank controls of ancient times, and I think they all managed to retain the spirit of the original while offering an overall more accessible experience. Bar Resident Evil 3, I guess. Partly because Capcom seems determined to trap the OG trilogy on the PS1 forever, so you can only play the originals via emulation. But I've already talked about that in this video, check it out. Anyway, I mentioned all that to compare the 3 most recent remakes with that first remake. Naturally, they don't really fit together neatly, which makes sense, seeing as there was a 17-ish year gap between them. The Resident Evil series in general went through multiple evolutions during that time, so their approach to game development and design has shifted quite a lot since 2002. That's also not to mention that key figures of the olden days of the franchise have moved on, like Mr. Mikami himself. Rip Tango, by the way. The point of bringing all that up is to spotlight the biggest reason I think a remake is a good idea, or at least an idea I can get behind. It would be Capcom's chance to bring the very first Resident Evil game to modern consoles in a manner similar to what they did for its 3 mainline sequels. They could give the father of this franchise a facelift in the same style as 2 through 4 by making a third-person over-the-shoulder shooter. I feel like RE2 Remake has already shown us just how well that could be done. Both the Spencer Mansion and the RPD station are iconic locations, and RE2 did a masterful job translating said police station to this new gameplay style pretty damn well, so I don't see why the same couldn't be done for Spencer Mansion. Even looking outside of the remakes, RE7's Baker House is probably the best survival horror map the series has had since it left the PS1, so it's not like the series has lost its touch when it comes to good map design. They did a fantastic job on that weird ass house a few games ago, so why couldn't they do it again with the weird ass mansion of the first game? Plus, RE Engine is top tier and has created some fantastic looking games. Just imagine exploring the creepy ass hallways and rooms of RE1 in high fidelity, up close and personal with Jill or Chris. The atmosphere of the first remake is about as good as it gets, but it could hit harder if presented the same way as the rest of the modern remakes. It also just makes sense to me to complete the trilogy in the same style of remake, and yes, the first game got one already, I know, but at this point that remake is almost as old as the original. The time between the first and second remakes is nearly 3 times that of the time between the first game and its remake. It still holds up incredibly well, but I still think it's probably not as accessible to general audiences in the same way the other remakes are. So many people are discovering the series for the first time thanks to this batch of remakes, and going from RE2 or 3 remake to RE1 remake might cause some whiplash for newer fans. It did a bit for me, and I had a pretty good idea of what to expect. The fixed camera angles and bizarre tank controls, even when done better in a remake, will feel way more foreign to people who have only played the new ones rather than growing up playing the originals. I mean, I felt that way once I started diving into the original games, and of course you adjust eventually, but not everyone is going to have the patience to do that. Side note, if you do like the remakes and you haven't checked out the originals, you 100% should, even just to see how far gaming has come. Plus, those games are still absolute bangers. Basically, remaking RE1 in the same vein as the others would give the series some needed synergy, and I can't believe I just used that word unironically. I've also seen plenty of people point out that an RE5 or Code Veronica remake would need to revolve around plot threads introduced in the first game. The whole rivalry between Chris and Wesker is established in that game's story, and people who have only played the remakes will be missing out on that. It makes sense from a storytelling perspective to reintroduce those story beats for modern fans before diving into the games that explore them deeper. As much as RE5 and Code Veronica could benefit from remakes, especially Code Veronica, that game is ass, RE1 getting remade first would help the stories of those games hit a little harder and let the overarching themes and character developments flow better. Now, to be completely fair, it honestly might not make a big enough difference to matter. Resident Evil has never been a series where the story takes center stage. It's always the environments and gameplay that are the focus, and that ends up working out in their favor in instances like this. The best way to enjoy the story of a Resident Evil game is to just strap in, turn off your brain a bit, and enjoy the ride. Because of that, they could probably get away without doing an RE1 remake, but the overall story would benefit immensely if they did. Like I said at the top of the video, this is all conjecture, so in the end it really doesn't matter one way or the other. I think it's for sure possible that we get a remake at some point down the line. However, in the same breath, it wouldn't be too surprising if we didn't. That original remake is very much accessible on modern consoles in a way that classic RE2 and 3 aren't, so in that regards a remake is pretty redundant, especially if they keep the perspective and style of the original once again. To me, the only way doing another take on RE1 would be justified is if it was made to match the style of the more recent remakes. Make it an over-the-shoulder survival horror game just like they did with RE2. I personally would love that because that's my preferred type of Resident Evil game anyway, and I'll take as many of those as I can get. Assuming they're still good games, of course. Taking that approach would at least somewhat justify making the same game 3 different times, especially if all 3 offer unique experiences and appeal to different people. In a way, it would also be an interesting representation of the evolution of gaming as a medium. Resident Evil has been around a long time and has changed and evolved so much over the last 28 years. The differences between games now and when the first RE game released are rather drastic, so remaking it once again isn't as ridiculous as it might sound at first. I don't know, man, it's all pretty irrelevant anyway. Capcom is going to do whatever Capcom does, regardless of anything said in this random ass video. For the time being, I think it's just kind of fun to talk about and do a little bit of theorizing. Speaking of, let me know down in the comments what you think about all this. What remake do you want to see next? Or are you sick of the remakes and just want RE9 already? I really don't mind either way as long as whatever game they release next is fun to play. Hopefully we will hear something from Capcom soon about what they're cooking up, and in the meantime we'll see you in whatever we do next.